Eventide Entertainment presents The Drive-In, hosted by Aaron Lopez. Welcome back to another episode of The Drive-In, episode 13. This time we're looking at The Post, starring Meryl Streep, Tom Hanks, directed by Steven Spielberg. This one was nominated for 6 Golden Globes, but it did not win any. But it is getting a lot of Oscar buzz. My guest today is my wife, Jordan. Jordan, thanks for coming on again. This is our third time on the show officially.
Thanks for inviting me.
So yeah, it was kind of one of those shows that when we were looking at and we saw trailers, it was one that she was kind of intrigued by, mostly because it had Meryl Streep and Sarah Paulson. Thank you, yeah, Sarah Paulson in it, and so I dragged her along to go see it last night. I am going to apologize in advance because she was a little distracted last night. Jordan, would you like to tell everybody why you were distracted last night?
We went to the movie during the best Vikings game ever. They faced the Saints, and they won with a Hail Mary pass that, quote, Aaron, they had no business of winning.
Yeah, if you guys are fans of sports and you saw the game, this has been, by the time this comes out, it'll have been a few days. But the Vikings had a Hail Mary play against the Saints. They were winning by 17 at half. They should not have let it come down to this. But they won somehow, and it was a pretty cool play. But Jordan was more interested in that the entire movie than this. So we'll see how much of The Post she actually remembers. Okay, but before we get started with the actual discussion of The Post, as always, we're going to give you a trailer rundown of our movies that we saw in the trailers before the movie. So, last night we had Love, Simon, Red Sparrow, Mamma Mia 2, The 1517 to Paris, A Wrinkle in Time, Winchester, and Annihilation. Did any of those stand out to you as ones that you would like to see?
Winchester, definitely, I'm interested in. A Wrinkle in Time looks okay, but I've never read the book, and it looks a little cheesy, but it's got some great people in it. I think that's about it. Yeah,
Winchester looks interesting, and I've said this from the first day that if Helen Mirren is stepping into a scary movie, it's going to be a good movie. She's not going to attach her name to anything that's garbage, other than maybe Red 2. But, yeah, I think that one looks interesting. That should be coming out here in a couple weeks. What were your thoughts on Annihilation? Because that's probably the one that of the 7 that we saw, that's the one I think I'm most excited for, just because, not necessarily because who's in it, Natalie Portman doesn't get me too excited as far as acting goes, but the sci-fi nature and the plot kind of seemed interesting. At least it's kind of my cup of tea as far as movies go, but what did you think about that one?
Sci-fi is not my thing. I don't mind Natalie Portman. It looks really interesting, it looks well done, and it looks like there's a lot of science that backs it up. I mean, even in the trailer, they were talking about you can't crossbreed. What was that? A crocodile and a shark. Yeah. And they're saying that the shimmer was basically enhancing everything and starting evolution of sorts.
Yeah, the whole concept was that you had some people that were saying that it was destroying everything in its path, and I think one of the last lines of the trailer says it's not destroying, it's evolving, or it's changing. Yeah. It's enhancing. I think that was the word that they used. So, yeah, it's interesting for me. It's one of the big movies that people have been talking about, or I've at least heard a lot of 2018 buzz. So I'll be interested in checking it out once it does come out. One that came out as far as new trailers that I had not yet seen, that I kind of want your input in, is Red Sparrow. That's the Jennifer Lawrence movie. About the kind of the Russian spies using sex to... what did you think of that one? Because that one, I don't know if it's the trailer or the concept. I don't know if I'm excited for it, but it's getting a lot of buzz, of course, because Jennifer Lawrence is in it. But what was your takeaway from that?
It looks interesting. I completely forgot about that one. I like Jennifer Lawrence. The idea behind it is kind of that sleeper cell, sleeper soldier type of deal. But with females, so I'm excited to see it. I always worry that it's going to be too womanizing in
Yeah.
a sense, you know, because they even said in the trailer, what was it? Officers that use their bodies
Oh,
to manipulate.
it is going to be over-sexualized.
Yeah.
I can tell you that right now just from the trailer. And yes, the line was that they were specific types of spies. They were children who had been groomed to learn how to use their bodies and sex to get what they wanted and to get what they needed to learn.
Yeah.
So yeah, that would not surprise me one bit if this was an over-sexualization of the female characters, but the plot just screams that to me.
The thing about that, though, is that maybe it's opening up maybe there's some goodness in it. Maybe they're bringing light to some actual children that are forced into something like this. So I'll be interested to see it.
Yeah, and as always, we've gotten, I think this is the third or fourth movie in a row that I've seen the Mamma Mia trailer. Still don't care. I still don't. Every time I see Cher, I still laugh, as I think you do.
Every time. And I know she's coming, but I can't help it because Cher looks younger than Meryl Streep.
Cher to me, in that end of the trailer, looks more like an older Lady Gaga than anything. That's all I get. Every time she steps out, she's got the Lady Gaga hair and glasses, but a couple wrinkles. That's what I see.
I guarantee that the entire paycheck of Cher was more than the entire production cost.
Oh yeah, and she'll only be in the movie for like a ninth of the movie.
Yeah, but it's Cher. She can demand whatever she wants.
Exactly. All right, so yeah, that's a pretty good rundown. So we'll go ahead and look at the spoiler-free summary of the post. And honestly, this is one that I look at and I feel even funny for giving a quote-unquote spoiler-free summary. It's based on a historical event, guys. I think that if you are worried about spoilers with a movie based on historical details, you probably aren't going to see the post in the first place. But despite that, we will give you one. Anyways, so this is a cover-up that spanned 4 U.S. presidents, pushed the country's first female newspaper publisher, and a hard-driving editor to join in an unprecedented battle between the press and the government. How true. All right, so this is the part of the show where if you have not yet seen the movie, you need to take a little bit of a break, go check out the post, and then come back to see what it is that we have got to say about it. All right, so now that we have given everybody a chance to step away if they haven't seen the movie, we're going to go ahead. We've got those with us that are either really interested in hearing you and I talk or just hearing what is going to happen when I have my wife on. We've got a couple friends that are definitely going to be interested in checking this one out. So they're probably listening just to hear the banter that'll go on, the arguing or whatever you want to call it. Or they actually saw the movie and they want to see what we have to say. So let's get to it. This is a rundown from plot, so we'll start at the beginning. The movie starts with the Vietnam jungle scene. Kind of shows the reality of the war. For me, I felt this was a little cliche. It makes sense to start it out with this. But Spielberg's movies starting with a scene that depicts war has been seen before. I don't know. It was kind of like he was like, oh, I'm doing a drama about Washington Post, but I still want to include some action in it. What did you think about the introduction with the Vietnam War being depicted?
Honestly, it wasn't as striking as I thought it was going to be. I thought it was going to be a little scarier. We knew what to expect when they started going into the jungle. And
absolutely.
Raining and dark. So I knew what was happening. But it was no big deal.
Okay. The plane ride back actually starts to show the conflict, I guess, if you want to say the conflict of the movie, which is how the government is portraying the Vietnam War. You've got Robert McNamara, who is saying that the war is not going well. It looks about the same. That he said that the most interesting aspect to him is that nothing has changed at all. Actually, let me go back and say that again. It was McNamara who agreed with Ellsberg, who's the guy who's writing the piece about all this. So Ellsberg's the one who says that. McNamara, though, agrees with him, saying, if we put 1 million men into this war and nothing has happened in the positive, then it's going poorly. And you got LBJ who's sitting in the plane there saying, well, it actually, I think things are going optimistic. Well, McNamara gets off the plane and he says that everything is going well. I've got no prepared remarks, but from what we've seen, everything is going well. We're optimistic. What do you think, though, about this? Because behind closed doors, McNamara is very much opposed to the war, says there's no way that we can win. But to the public, he says that things are going well. With me, it's the connection to today with the idea of government saying one thing but actually doing another that really starts to jump this whole storyline and push it forward. What do you think?
I think it was a heart to now, to the present, to what's happening currently with the censorship of our news and media. Maybe if you had asked me a year ago, I would have said, man, that's scary. Now I'm like, yeah, that happens literally all the time, and we shouldn't be surprised anymore that it's been happening for decades.
Yeah.
It was just kind of nice to see that, but also I wondered if it was trying to put McNamara in a good light.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I had a better opinion of him than I would have had I not seen that scene and continued to watch the movie.
Yeah, and we'll talk about that a little bit later, because there are some elements about that I want to discuss, kind of just take a step away from the movie and talk about the concepts that they were portraying. So we'll jump to that in a little bit. But Ellsberg, who is the one of the guys working for McNamara, writing up this report, he notices there's a little bit of a side eye as he's getting off the plane, and he notices McNamara saying the exact opposite of what he was saying on the plane. And I really liked that. I loved the fact that they showed this actor looking off to the side, definitely taken back by what was going on. He wasn't too pleased with that. He was kind of like, wait, you just said one thing, but now you're telling all these reporters another. So it doesn't surprise you then in the next scene to see that he is stealing documents and kind of in this like 60s hippie car going, and that was a little cliche to me too. Like, you're going to find out that I thought there was a ton of cliches in this. Like, starts out with a Spielberg war scene and then jumps right into, 60s, hippie movement trying to take the man down. And you have the guy with the stringy hair driving the car. Like, conspiracy theory guy with the glasses driving the car, and then the girl who, she's just there to turn the lights on and unlock the doors. It's just kind of a weird, I don't know, it just wasn't too thrilled with the portrayal of it, because we know what was going on, but hey, it's history, so if that's the way it happened, I can't really complain. So he steals and copies the study showing the lies of the government. Then we jump forward about 6 years, I think it was. 71 is where the majority of the storyline takes place. So we see Kathy Graham, Meryl Streep, at home preparing for a meeting. And this is where we really start to see this major theme of female versus male perceptions and the opinions of one over the other having more weight. This is a topic that I think is kind of near and dear to you, so I wanted to get your perspective on this. What did you think of the portrayal of Streep as a woman in a man's world? We can talk about throughout the movie because it's not really a plot, but it's more of a theme. How do you think that was portrayed?
I didn't love it at first, and especially in this first scene where we first see her, it's not clear what the object is. It's not clear that she's clearly going up against a bunch of guys in a giant boardroom, and we don't get the rest of the story until, really we don't get the whole story until maybe a half hour in, that we find out that her father left the company to her husband opposed to her, and that the whole thing was she was selling shares was because they were losing money, and they thought open up more shares to the public but make it cheaper, when that was their whole plan. I did not like the portrayal at first, because I thought this was going to be a more empowerment type movie, and it really wasn't. It was just very subtle on how they did it. And after reflecting on it from last night, I realized it's probably how it actually happened. Not everybody gets a parade.
Yeah.
It was subtle, and I guess I can appreciate that from a historical aspect.
Well, and there was that scene with her daughter who was portrayed by Alison Brie, who I was very happy that, we'll talk about this later, but the ensemble of this movie was just very well done. They got a lot of people to play these actors. They got a lot of people to portray these characters that you've seen before, and you wouldn't necessarily expect them to be a Spielberg kind of actor, but outside of Streep and Hanks. But they did a really, really good job doing it. So, like I was saying, this Bree scene where she's telling her, this is just how it was. When your father handed over the company to when your grandfather handed the company over to your father, I was happy. That's how it was supposed to be, And so, it was a really interesting way of seeing the reality of the situation as opposed to, all of these people who are watching the movie now in 2018 saying, no, that's bullshit. Like, you deserve to have this. It's your family. Just because your husband is a man doesn't mean that he deserves it anymore. But like you said, the historical accuracy of it that's just how it was. Yeah. Took some time for that too. And actually, honestly, this whole movie, the events that happened in this could have actually helped push that further away from the male-dominated world. So, so that's kind of cool. Like you said, though, they are getting ready to go public with the company. But the post isn't greatly valued. They find this out during the big board meeting. She walks in, she's the only woman in the entire meeting. And one of the actors that I really, really thought did a phenomenal job portraying the subtly chauvinistic man was Bradley Whitford. And I know you're not really good with names. Bradley Whitford, though, was he was
Arthur Parsons.
Arthur Parsons, yeah. Those of you who out there, Whitford's not really a leading man type, but he's the villain in Billy Madison. He's married to, what's her name from Malcolm in the Middle? I can't think of her name right now. Of course, I throw the name drop and I can't think of it. But yeah, he's done a really good job being kind of the sniveling, weaselly type of character. He pulls it back definitely really well in this, but he's throughout the entire movie, he's just there as this male dominant figure. He's the one who kind of always steps on Graham or Streep's toes, but not by being forceful about it. He's kind of just subtly saying, hey, I think this is what we need to do. But it's clear it's because he's the man who is saying it. That is why we need to listen to him. But they step into this meeting, and Tracy Letts, who plays Fritz, the right-hand man, one of the advisors of Graham, he says the same thing that she wrote down because he knows that him saying it will mean more than if she says it. And that kind of really sums up that female thoughts don't really mean as much concept.
Well, she was supposed to say everything she wrote down. That's why they were rehearsing. She was supposed to, and then it came to be her time, and she, for lack of a better term, chickened out.
She froze, yeah, and I wasn't sure, that was one of the things that felt like she froze, but at the same time, it almost felt like she, showed it to him. It might have been the editing.
Yeah, she didn't show it to him. She looks at it because she had to underline quality over quantity.
It was quality
will attain profit or
profitability.
Something.
Yeah, it's quality leads to profitability.
That's what it was.
Yeah,
and her partner next to her, I can't remember his name.
Fritz.
Almost gave her a subtle eye roll, like, come on, we rehearsed this. You were supposed to be, because he's on her side pretty much most of the time. He's trying to advise her from an objective point of view, and he's trying to say, you should take your lead because that's the only way they're going to listen to you. And she freezes and doesn't know how, and that was another thing when I was first watching. I was like, God damn it. Come on, Meryl. You had your chance.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Yeah, and it's one of those things, I'm glad you said that Fritz was, kind of on her side. Fritz was one of these characters who, whether or not he agreed with what Graham was saying or doing, he consistently says that it's her company, it's her decision, whether or not he likes it or not. And so that was one of those things that it wasn't all just about women's rights and how females' opinions aren't really validated or needed or respected, for that matter. Because you do have characters like Fritz, and even Ben Bradley, who we met, but Tom Hanks' character, who kind of pushes these ideas where they just know that the society dictates more of male ideas will be heard quicker than female ideas. They know that's the game, if you want to call it that. but they don't necessarily agree with it. They just know that's the game they have to play, in the society that they live.
And it lets you realize that without Fritz on the board, she probably would have lost that company a long time ago. Because it sounds like, so they continually showing the time, they continue to say that her husband's accident caused her to have the company, and it turns out he commits suicide.
Yeah.
But that's the etiquette back then, is to call it an accident. She actually calls it out in private. But it sounds like I thought it had only been like 5 years ago. No, it sounds like it was 10 or 15 years ago.
Yeah, in that conversation she has with Allison Brie, her daughter, comes out, it happened a while ago.
It sounds like her daughter was 16.
Or younger. Yeah, she was young.
Yeah. So yeah, it makes you wonder that I'm sure the board had tried to vote her out at some point, and maybe without Fritz's support, she probably wouldn't have the company anymore.
Yeah. So we find out that before this breakfast meeting that she has with Ben Bradley, at this early, they're out there rehearsing, that Nixon is not allowing, the Post is not going to be allowed to report on Nixon's daughter's wedding because of what was said about the other daughter's wedding from somebody at the Post. I think her name was Judas.
Judith.
I think it was Judas. I kept listening for it. There's a Judith who's also in the show. Look it up. But so we find these things out, and this is where Ben Bradley, Tom Hanks' character, really starts to come into the fold. So we see him talking about this idea of, well, who else is gonna, Streep asks, who's gonna do it instead of this person they're not gonna let report. And he's like, well, no, we're just not gonna do it. We're not going to allow the White House to dictate what we publish and what we don't publish. And there's the seeds of this are made there about this really big idea in this small little breakfast. And then we go and we find out a little bit more, and it's because this reporter actually crashed the reception and had not said some very nice things about Nixon's daughter. So they're not allowed to, and in this whole conversation, we find out about Neil Sheehan, who is a major author and actually currently works for the New York Times. And Bradley keeps asking the question, has anybody seen him? Has anybody seen him working or seen anything published by him? And they're like, no, it's been almost 3 months. So there's this idea that he's got something. He's been working on something big for these last few months. That's really interesting to me because you don't see that anymore. You never see that. That's kind of the concept of the Times, of where we do have big stories that come out, but you don't have as very often as maybe back then, somebody kind of go off the map for a few months because they are working and they're really trying to give you this piece. Honestly, I think the closest thing that I could come up with off the top of my head is when ESPN recently broke out this big story about the Patriots and how there's all this hatred within, and how you've got Tom Brady and Robert Kraft and Belichick who kind of hate each other. And it came out and everyone just lost their minds. It's a huge deal. But that person hadn't written a story in a little while, so they'd been working on that. So that's probably the closest thing I can come up with, but it just doesn't happen very often. I thought that was kind of an interesting thing to see. But the Sheehan article then does break. This kind of shows the deception that the government has been holding, the lies that they have been telling for decades, actually.
And it breaks out in the Times.
Yeah, the Times do break this, and this is that Sheehan article. And so it's another blow to the Post. The Post has not been doing well, and now the Times continue to be giving these big breaks, reporting on stories that the Post never even knew.
And the Post is just a small local paper at this point.
Yes, it is.
Which I found hard to believe. I didn't realize that it was just local, small time, no big deal. Where New York Times, I think, was national.
I think so. And if it wasn't, it was massively regional. It overshadowed the Post as far as geography.
Yeah, immensely. Like, no one knew about the small time, no big deal newspaper. Although they didn't portray it that way. They seem to have large offices and stuff like that.
Oh, yeah. I mean, the way it was portrayed was almost like it was a big time. It just didn't have the reach. Mm-hmm. Or was trying to be big time. So this Sheehan article does break, but there's an injunction. This injunction then prevents any further information from being published. how real is this? They always say history repeats itself, but this is one of those where you're just like, yeah, so the government is telling the news what it can and can't post or publish. When you saw this, what were some of the things going through your mind as far as the relatability to today?
It's so scary because they're trying to do that right now. I can't remember the specific laws or any rules that they're trying to do, but the government has tried to censor CNN, especially. I know is a big one. I don't think anything's gonna go through, but it's scary to think that they're even trying.
Yeah. Well, and I mean, I think that it's one of those things that we're all very aware of the fact that the government doesn't always like what is said about it, but that's the whole checks and balances, this free press, this idea that the government doesn't necessarily get to dictate what is said about them. They just have to make sure they're doing what they're needing to do. Okay, so I think that pretty much gets us though to a good breaking point. With the injunction and everything. So let's all go to the lobby, take a little break, go ahead and refill your popcorn, get a refill on your drinks, and let's see what is coming up soon from Eventide.
There's nothing quite as satisfying as a good conversation with intelligent company. Join comedian Don Smith every week as he sits down and talks with comedians, actors, filmmakers, writers, and everyday schmoes. It's The Life with Don Smith, Wednesdays at noon on 106.9 FM, and now available on the Eventide Entertainment podcast feed every Friday on Spreaker, YouTube, and iTunes. The weekdays are made for working, but the weekends, those are made for gaming. Join Ellison Smith every Saturday for a new episode of Saltwater Gaming as he breaks down video games of all different genres, consoles, platforms, and eras. Get a bit of the old and a bit of the new, a bit of the action and a bit of the mystery. Get it all every Saturday on Saltwater Gaming, brought to you by Eventide Entertainment.
So we're back for the second half, and during the little break we noticed that I was actually recording on the wrong microphone, so you're going to notice a lot better quality, so apologize for that, but we are back and we are rolling in the second half. So after the injunction passes, that is where we see Ben Bagdekian, I think his name was, I can't pronounce it correctly. That's Bob Odenkirk's character though. Bob Odenkirk, actually, this is where I found a little bit of an interesting tidbit. So, David Cross is in the movie, Bob Odenkirk's in the movie, and these two guys were writers and stars, and basically the whole show of the Mr. Show, which was kind of an older Comedy Central TV show. Not necessarily as bad as the Man Show, but kind of a little bit of male-dominant, male-centric, which I find really interesting, that they are both portraying characters within this, which kind of goes against that and shows, hey, here's the motivation and here's the power behind a woman's voice and power behind a woman's decision. So I don't know. This is if there was any connection to Mr. Show, or if it's just coincidental. But David Cross is definitely, and Bob Odenkirk are not necessarily two names that jump to the forefront for dramas. Very much so. Bob Odenkirk being like Saul from Better Call Saul. And David Cross being the nerdy comedian that really doesn't scream drama whatsoever. So really cool. I thought they both did a phenomenal job, but I thought that was really kind of weird that they were both in the movie. So he gets some information and he realizes he needs to call Ellsberg. They both work together at Rand, and this is where it starts to come out that Bagdekian may be able to get the same files that the Times had. And this might then give the Post an opportunity to, as they keep saying, stay in the ball game. I think that Tom Hanks' character says, we're back in the game, we're back in the ball game so many times. And so he runs with the lead and eventually does get these files from Ellsberg.
We need to talk about how trying to contact Ellsberg, though, was so intense. And this is real life. It's kind of funny that you can't secure email someone or get a burner phone and text them to hide from the government. This guy had to go more off the grid than any of us could ever imagine. I mean, how do you pronounce his name? Bagdikian?
Yeah.
Bagdikian had to go through... he had a list of at least 10 people he was calling and companies he was calling to try and get Dan's whereabouts and number. And it was crazy.
Yeah.
And he had to call from a secure phone, which was a pay phone, and he had to call from different phones after he finally got someone who could contact him. And the reality of him getting a phone number on the phone, this guy just says 7 numbers real quick. Like,
call this number.
Call this number.
Doesn't wait for him to write it down,
Nope.
and he's like, oh, he keeps saying it. It's kind of a funny moment.
That's the reality, though, is like, you don't have your phone to punch it in or whatever. This guy has to find a pencil somewhere and write it down, and he ends up not even finding a pencil. He just remembers it.
Mm-hmm.
And I know it's really stupid, but I thought, oh my god, I would never be able to do that.
Well, and I think that's kind of funny, and that's one of those skills. Don't they say like only the human brain can only handle so many like numbers, like the memory, once it gets to a certain amount, then it starts chucking out some other information to make room.
Exactly, and it's this, remembering phone numbers is a skill that we're all quickly losing. I don't even know your phone number. I don't have a clue. If I was
don't
ever
even know your
stranded,
own phone number,
I would be screwed.
Yeah. Well, and that's the thing is phone numbers, we're getting off topic, but who cares? This phone number thing it's sectioned off. It's not 7 numbers, it's 3 and 4, and we can remember 3 and we can remember 4. Yeah, that's just kind of a funny little side note. But yeah, I think that's absolutely true, because he is at a station of like 4 or 5 different phones, and he calls from one, and they says call from another one. And I'm thinking, like, oh, okay, he's got to go to another... No, he just goes 2 down, but he's still calling from a different phone, which I think is really interesting, and we don't see that anymore, so...
And really, in reality, is a secure line really that payphone down the street? I don't know if that's true.
No, but the randomness of it...
Yeah, it seemed to help.
Yeah. So he goes and calls him, figures out, hey, here's where he's at, goes to this like hotel, this motel... And sitting in the motel are a copy of all of the files. 14,000
pages worth. And we learned, because we just saw in the beginning of the movie that he took 3 files.
Yeah.
Turns out he took all the files,
and it took him
in different increments.
Like a couple of years to do it all, yeah.
Yeah, it's, and I really kept thinking of Snowden.
Yeah, you definitely get that.
This was like Snowden's basic idol. I mean, the 70s Snowden. It's pretty interesting. But it was so easy to put these paper files in your briefcase and just walk on out, no big deal. Yeah. You wouldn't be able to do that now, but very interesting.
And it's one of those things that the fact that he knew the guards at the beginning and he walked out without any issue at all. Mm-hmm. It's just pretty cool. It's just cool to show that something like this could not happen in today's world. Well, we get the files, takes him to Bradley's house, and this is where we get for me, probably the funniest part. And this is not a comedy whatsoever. But this is the lemonade stand. She's like, "Yeah, would you like some lemonade?" And he just walks right past her. Has government secrets in his hands. He's not worried about lemonade. And I didn't even realize that this was. I should have, but I didn't realize that this little girl was actually Bradley's daughter.
Yeah.
But yeah, so she comes in asking if they want lemonade as they're going through all these files, and you're like, "How much?" 25 cents. Oh, no, 50. Just went up. Inflation.
The best line was, anybody want any lemonade? Does it have vodka in it?
What's vodka? I don't put vodka in my
I don't put vodka in it.
Yeah.
That was Judith, and I did look up her name. It is Judith.
Okay.
Not Judas.
All right. So, yeah, and it's the reading at the Bradley house. They essentially have 7 hours or 8 hours, I think they said, until they go to print to look through all of these pages don't have page numbers on them. Mm-hmm. They have no idea what order they go in. And basically, they have to make a decision of, can they put together an article, one that gives the correct information and actually does what they want to in this short amount of time.
You need to explain why it doesn't have page numbers, though. That's pretty important.
Well, go ahead.
So the reason it doesn't have page numbers is because throughout the years, they had to, first of all, copy these sheet by sheet. And you should have seen this copier. I mean, it was bigger than my kitchen table.
That's huge.
But they had to cut out the bottom portion of all the pages that had the page number and secret No.
Top secret classified.
Top secret classified, right. All at the bottom, so they would just strip the bottom of every single page.
Yeah. So he has all these. And it's pretty cool because, it's almost like a little puzzle. But they're trying to figure out whether or not they even should legally go about doing this. Mm-hmm. So they bring in the legal counsel for the Post, and I was excited to see this guy. So Jesse Plemons, who we most recently saw in the first episode of the most recent season of Black Mirror, who I like to call Matt Damon 2.0. The dude sounds and looks just like him.
Exactly.
It's not just that he looks like him.
Or a brother.
Yeah.
Like, it could be a brother or very close cousin. Like, when we saw him in Black Mirror, which I don't remember what episode that was.
Is USS Callister.
In season 4.
Yeah.
We were like, is that Matt Damon?
Yeah.
No, it's got to be a Damon. It has to be
We thought that, honestly, and I'd seen this guy before, but I don't know if I'd really heard him talk all that much. Enough that I was like, okay, he sounds like him. They've got to be related. Mm-hmm. And they're not. It's just a huge coincidence.
And that is a thing on the internet. People are all concerned about Black Mirror season 4. Is that Matt Damon? Or is that Matt Damon's brother? It's a big deal. We were not the only ones.
So, he comes in and he is the legal counsel and plays it well. I mean, it's a bit role, but he plays it really well. But, every sign basically points to don't publish. There's just not enough time to publish, to go through everything to publish this in 7 hours. There's not enough proof that this won't damage the government or any of their, not necessarily the government, but their efforts in the war. There's no way that they can definitely say that this is not going to be treason. They're all, and definitely a Tom Hanks moment where they say, can you 100% guarantee that this is not going to give away any secrets that could potentially lose one American life? And he's like, yeah, I guarantee it. He's like, really? And he's like, no. And he does that Tom Hanks voice where I was like, okay, yep, there was that Hanks moment. Mm-hmm. It was pretty funny. And I guarantee you he wasn't supposed to do that, but he, in that voice, but you can't prevent it. Yeah. So, but all the signs point to don't publish. And this is where the main conflict of the story comes across, is this free press. And this is where I said, let's hold off for this discussion. Let's talk about it now. They decide that if they publish it, that they could potentially go to jail. They could lose everything, but they would be doing a service to the American people. If they don't publish it, they could keep their company. They wouldn't go to jail. However, they would pretty much be losing the integrity of the free press. Mm-hmm. Where do you stand in this? Of course, we know this whole concept of what they actually did. We know what happened, but put yourself in their shoes. What would you do? Would you publish it or not?
100% I would publish it. I mean, it's kind of like keeping a family secret that is going to damage everyone in the end. It's not for the greater good to keep this quiet. And our government isn't supposed to, it's not a secret. It can't be.
Yeah.
The best part of the show is the very last quote we hear that from the Supreme Court, and I won't go over it now because I'm sure we'll get to it, but it's important to know what our government's up to, especially if they're going to force us into something. Mm-hmm. And what we haven't gone over is that these papers were basically a Pentagon study years even before the Vietnam War started, explaining that there's no way we could win this war. We had no business of being in this war at all. And also it talked about rigging the elections in Vietnam and trying to get stuff to go to the U.S. side, and those are big deals.
Yeah.
These weren't war plans like they say later in one of the courtrooms. It said something about, would you have posted these if it was
before D-Day?
Yeah, before D-Day, if these were war plans or whatever, or a strategic plan to go forward. And the guy
Jesse Plemons
says, these are totally different.
Yeah, you can't compare the two.
This is a scientific study with math behind it that shows we have no business of being here. And yet you still went and you gambled with the lives of the Americans. And that was one of the big things that Streep came forward when I finally started to like her character. We didn't touch that. Streep is huge friends with McNamara in the Nixon administration. Tom Hanks he had dinner once a night with the Kennedys at the White House all the time. But Streep brings up to McNamara, my son's home, but you sent him there and there was no reason for it. And thank God that he came home alive. When most people that went did not come back alive. And that was her big motivation behind it. They only touched on it, but it made me realize another side, because I was kind of on the side of, well, should we be keeping these secrets? Probably, are they, because we didn't really know exactly what they were.
Mm-hmm.
And then she shows her side of it, and I was like, oh, I didn't even think of that. I'm not a mother, so I wouldn't have thought of that in any way. But you sent our boys over there, and they lost their lives for no reason when you knew at the beginning, before sending them in, there was no hope. A huge driving force and her whole reason for eventually publishing.
Yeah, I think that is it's a big deal, because it really shows off this concept of I can see McNamara's side of like, okay, we don't want to scare the American public. That I can agree with. The fact that he held it for 6 years, knowing that they weren't going to win, it's like basically it's renting an apartment. You're burning money, knowing that you could go and buy a house and start building equity. This is definitely that moment that it makes sense that we don't need to agree whether or not we could have won the war or not won the war. And you had mentioned this idea. We didn't say this because it's just a small detail, but when Bagdekian goes to Ellsberg in the motel, he says that 10% was to step in for the elections. 20% of this war was to prevent the spread of communism. 70% of this war was to basically avoid the embarrassment of losing.
Exactly. And
that's what it was. And that's what it was from a very early moment in the war. And that really jumps forth in this conversation that they have, her and Streep and McNamara. And I think that jumps as being a major driving force in this whole conflict, this theme of the free press, because it doesn't necessarily matter who your friends are. Mm-hmm. McNamara and Graham were friends. There's a story that Bradley tells about going and trying to console Jackie Kennedy after JFK was shot. Mm-hmm. And one of the first things out of her mouth was, none of this will be in your newspaper. And he was hurt more for the fact that at that moment he realized that their friendship was kind of a facade.
It was a business, it was a business relationship, not a friendship.
Yeah, he didn't go there to get a scoop or to get a story. Mm-hmm. He went there to console a friend. Mm-hmm. That wasn't how she saw him. And of course, she had just gone through hell, as much as you can say it's hell. But that still shows, that relationship. So, mm-hmm. So all of the men are telling her to do one thing, except for Bradley, who is telling her to publish. She decides to publish. She said, all right, let's go. Let's do it, And so they go through. This is one of the parts of the movie for me, though, visually was kind of the coolest. Mm-hmm. It's a drama. It's just historical. It's not the most exciting movie in the world, but this was really cool. From the moment he finds out that they say publish, and it shows like the newspaper, okay, they press the button and it goes through, and then you see, all of the guys are bundling up all the different newspapers and sending them out. And it's just kind of a cool, the rush of this matched the emotional rush that you were getting, because you're like, okay, they're doing it. There's something happening now. And I thought visually it was a cool element to include.
The thing before that, when they're on the phone, was really interesting. You see that it's Meryl Streep in an office by herself. She has shoot everyone out. But there's 5 other men on different phone lines talking to her. And that's why Meryl Streep is an award winner.
Yeah.
That scene where the internal struggle without words.
Mm-hmm.
You can see it in her face, just going through every situation that's possible. It was amazing. That's when I actually started liking the character.
So as they get to that point, the White House then finds out that they have done this. They call the post office. Or not the post office, the Washington Post's office, and basically says, you need to stop doing this. If you don't, we're going to take you to court. And it's almost a formality at this point, because Bradley even says, Tom Hanks says that, I'm going to have to politely decline. And they said, okay, thank you. And they hang up. And it's like, they knew what they were going to say. Mm-hmm. They had to ask them to stop, or, it was one of those peace offerings to say they did it, but they knew what was going to happen. So the Times and the Post then are on the same side for once as they go to the Supreme Court. What I found interesting was how quickly this happened. It was, so they were asking what happens next, and he's like, all right, well, we'll be in court tomorrow. You're like, tomorrow? Like, no. Court cases take, months to get together, and these injunctions are there basically to say, okay, we're going to put a freeze on everything, and then we'll go back and talk about it. And that's what courts are now, it seems. But with the security of the entire country at stake, maybe that's why it got pushed forward.
Yeah. And then he says, and if that goes well, in a week we'll be with the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court? You're going to be there in a week?
Yeah.
What?
Which, I mean, I think it just shows the importance of the situation. So we see them in court. We basically just see snippets. This is one of those moments I really wasn't impressed. It seemed kind of rushed. We're rushing to the end after this moment for how long they built up to the moment of them publishing. After publishing, all very felt rushed. But there was a line that I really enjoyed. It was after they all had gone to court. They're waiting for a decision, and Odenkirk's character says I always wanted to be part of a rebellion, and he's smiling and he's just kind of laughing, and he's like, what? Tom Hanks is like, what? And he shows him, and Tom Hanks takes the bag full of what we don't know yet to Graham, and starts saying, they followed suit, and starts laying down newspaper after newspaper that all have shown similar stories they were waiting to publish until the Post did. Yep. And that was cool. That was a really cool moment. For me, that was the coolest little, because that is something that may not have actually happened the way it did. Mm-hmm. The rest of the movie felt just like a historical drama. This one actually had some filmmaking writing to it. Yeah. Which I liked. I thought that was really neat. And we see that the newspapers did win. There's a 6-3 win. What's your opinion on this? Because this was very surprising to me. You have one of the I think it's the editorial head. She is listening on the phone as things are getting announced. She's like, "Oh, there's a ruling," and she's getting ready to announce it. And a guy comes in off the side and yells, 6-3, we win. Mm-hmm. And I was like, okay, hold on. Why have her on the phone at all if you're going to have a guy on the side yell it out anyway?
I mean, it kind of shows the timeline of when information was available.
Yeah.
She had information, so she was probably getting first of all, that was Judith, by the way.
Was it?
Yeah. So, I know we talk so much about stupid Judith. Anyway, Judith was probably on the phone with probably a reporter of some sort that was at the Supreme Court waiting for everyone to come out. Because 6-3 being the Supreme Court judges that decided. So she's probably waiting for that phone call. And that reporter is only getting it in as much as possible. Probably fighting 100 people through the doors to try and get the decision and hear about it. And that guy, the guy who called it out before her, received some sort of fax?
Yeah, I didn't know what it specifically was, but it definitely, it was printing out. It was in the same way that they got the information, finding out that the Times also had information. It was like a long piece of paper, so...
Yeah, I assume it was some sort of fax or dictation machine, but it's showing how information got out. It was interesting because it's like, there's the phone calls and everyone's waiting for the phone call. But maybe some inside person was able to fax it to them first. Or maybe it was, you know how things leak. Maybe the phone call was a leak or the fax was a leak.
Yeah.
So I assume they're just trying to keep us in that setting of what age it was, which I needed reminding of sometimes. Why can't you just email Daniel Ellsberg? Well, you can't.
Yeah. Well, and it's you see the newspapers win, and as you had said earlier, one of the justices had said that the press was there as a support to the governed, not to the governing. They're not there to try to help out people who are in charge. They're there to basically be there for the people, which was a really powerful line because we kind of forget that sometimes, where in a time where you have news outlets being so right or left or wherever they fall, you forget that they're not there as a way to promote an agenda of a political party. They're originally there to just tell what's going on, unbiased, express what's happening, so that then the people can make those their own opinions. That's not a world we live in anymore. Unfortunately, that just doesn't exist.
It's something we're fighting constantly. The press and the government is there to serve the people. They're not there to be kings and queens of their own domain. They are there to serve us and do what's best for us based on our collective decision. You know, I wonder if Spielberg had this in the back of his pocket, this movie, for a while, and just found the best way to do it, or just came up with it and was like, we definitely need to put this out now.
And they had to have had started production before Trump became president. Because movies take some time.
Yeah,
and
especially this kind of movie.
Yeah, so they had to have known they were going to make this. Why it came out when it did, of course,
it's
there's probably
timing.
There's stories out there, I'm sure, that we could find. I'm very surprised to find that it came out now, if that would have been a coincidence.
You know, where the people we're supposed to trust to govern our country are calling everything fake news, unless it's favorable to them. It's staggering how blind some people are. These people that support our shitty president are saying that, well, yeah, it's fake news because Trump didn't say it was true. Trump doesn't want you to know anything about him.
Surprisingly, if you guys have been paying attention to the news, Trump's said that things that he even said aren't true.
Exactly. I was just going to bring up the pussy grabbing video that he originally apologized for before he was sworn in. And now currently is saying, well, that wasn't me.
Well, and also the shithole countries.
Oh, yeah, the shithole countries that he supposedly didn't say, but literally everyone around him confirmed that it was.
It was also on a nationally televised news conference.
Yep.
So, and that's what's funny. We actually segues into the end of the movie, which shows Nixon. And I think I'd be surprised to find that this wasn't the case. It sounded very much like Nixon. I think that all of the Nixon tapes were actually recorded. I mean, we know that he recorded all of his phone calls. I think they actually got a hold of those and put those in because you never saw the guy who played Nixon, his face. It was just his gestures. Yeah. And it was always from the outside of the White House looking into the Oval Office. That seems like a Spielberg thing to do, is if you have the actual primary source, use it, especially in a historical drama, use it. And then we see, Nixon saying, well, the Post is never going to be in another White House press briefing. They'll never be at anything. Yeah. And as he's saying this, we see the beginnings of basically the Watergate scandal, where you see a security officer walking through the Watergate, noticing the taped door, coming into the Democratic offices, and seeing, the outside of it. We see the security guard calling something in, and then the flashlights of the Watergate, and them going.
That was an
and doing
interesting view.
That was a cool ending,
where they did outside of the building, and you could see in all four windows either a burglar or the security team.
Yeah, it was
cool. Or security officer. Yeah, and actually, just before we hear from Nixon, Meryl Streep's character goes, "Man, that was hard. But I really don't want to do something like that ever again."
Mm-hmm.
And I'm sure it was a matter of couple months, maybe at the most, that Watergate happened after this. Yeah, it puts a lot of things in perspective and gives you more of a timeline. Because I was curious as to, they give us the years, but I don't know unless there's a specific moment or event that happened. I couldn't quite place when all this happened, but then they bring up Watergate, and it kind of helped solidify everything.
Yeah. And I'm looking through, and I think that it's the ending is actually probably my favorite part, because again, there weren't a whole lot of elements of this movie that were actually an example of good writing, because it was history. They just had to retell the story. So their overall writing was well done, because they portrayed the situation as it happened. But the ending, that decision to actually show Streep talking about not wanting to deal with something this big again, and then having the time of it, putting the decision of having Nixon's phone call saying that the Post will never be in there again, that the press will never be anywhere near the White House again, and then for the next, so-and-so months and years, that's all they're doing because of the Watergate scandal. So I think that was one of my favorite parts, because it really showed strong decision-making in the filmmaking process, which, not saying that anything else wasn't strong, it just didn't feel it didn't feel like filmmaking. It felt like storytelling. Let me rephrase that: story retelling, because it was history. It's something that already happened. Okay, so since it is historical drama, we're not really going to ask the character you wanted to see more of, because it's just how history happened. But I am going to ask you which one of these situations you think was better portrayed. What was the moment or the idea that you feel was portrayed better? Women's rights or free press?
I would definitely say free press. That's not necessarily a bad thing that it was the highlight as opposed to women's rights, but I think it was voiced more clearly than women's rights. I wish it had been more on the women's rights, but you know what? It's historical accuracy, like I said. Not everybody gets a parade, and even when Meryl Streep walks from the Supreme Court house and she walks down the side away from the news reporters and all the women are looking at her, I felt like that wasn't real. I hope it was. How great would that be if that was real?
Yeah.
But I really did not feel it was realistic. I thought it was a Spielberg move, which is fine. I mean,
it may not have actually happened that way.
It may not have happened. It didn't seem realistic. But yeah, I felt like free press was definitely the voice of this movie, which is great. That's fine. We're all for free press and what it stands for.
Yeah, I think I'm with you there. Again, I'm glad you mentioned that moment as they're coming out of the courthouse, because that was a strong moment, and it was, whether or not it happened that way, I'm glad they included it, because for how much they drove this idea of Streep as the outsider simply because she's a woman, if they wouldn't have had that moment, it almost would have felt like an unanswered or an undiscussed, unfinished element of the story.
They marketed it not as a free press movie, but as a women's rights movie, which it is. But it's not nearly as prominent as I was expecting, which is the reason why I wanted to see it, but I am glad I saw it. But I did want to see more of Sarah Paulson. We didn't talk about her at all.
Unfortunately, she was barely in it.
Yeah, and her character felt like, hey, we got to show Sarah Paulson. And if it hadn't been Sarah Paulson in that role, we would have seen his wife maybe twice, and she wouldn't have said 2 words.
Yeah, and you know, she was an important character when she was there. She does basically convince Ben Bradley's character that Streep's, that Graham is going through a lot more than what he thinks she is. She's putting everything on the line. You're an editor. You can recover from this if this doesn't go well. She can't. Which is really important, because it shows just how important this was to her, how much of a risk it was for Graham to do this, as opposed to Bradley, who was just this guy who's, from the hip, just going and doing whatever he feels like he needs to do to really get the story. She's trying to survive. Granted, she said she's never had a job in her life. She never had to work.
Yeah, that was a huge deal.
But she also, at this point, she never had to work, but now she's in charge of a huge company who is employing many different people. So these decisions that she makes don't just affect her, they affect, hundreds of people. So I think I agree with you that I think free press really was the driving factor behind this, but I think that they did do a pretty good job of at least making sure that we didn't forget that women's rights was another major theme in this story.
Absolutely.
Okay, and before we move on to our final thoughts, and actually you can include this in your final thoughts, do you think that this movie is Oscar-worthy? Because it's getting some buzz. So your final thoughts, you can throw that analysis in there as well.
Final thoughts. So as far as it being Oscar-worthy, what makes it Oscar-worthy are the actors in it and the historical accuracy. But it's not entertaining for me. And I'm not like, I need an action movie. I love historical stories, but I just was not into it. But also, I want it to win for its poignant message. So, which is not the best way of thinking. I should go for the talent, which the talent was amazing. I should go for the entertainment, which was not wonderful, but history isn't exactly entertaining every day. But I want it to win for the message, for the reason. I want it to be a small little rebellion against what's currently going on in our lives. So yeah, I think it's Oscar worthy. It's got everybody in order. It's got all the ingredients to make an Oscar cake. So it's got Meryl Streep and Tom Hanks. It's got Spielberg. It's got, you said even the smaller cast was still huge. Sarah Paulson. What was his name? Not Fritz, but
Tracy Letts is a major deal too.
All that. There's amazing people. They did wonderful acting.
Bruce Greenwood, who played McNamara, was also did a great job.
They did wonderful. It was great. The only lacking thing was just trying to sit through a long movie. Oh, and we didn't mention another reason why I was distracted. I had the oldest lady next to me who could not stop breathing loudly or coughing. Every 2 seconds was
she couldn't clear her throat to save her life.
And when she was able to breathe through her coughing, it was just the loudest panting I've ever heard. Like sitting next to an old sleeping dog. It was horrible. So I was extremely distracted, so I apologize for my poor review today. But yes, Oscar worthy, probably. Will it win? I don't think so.
So, on a scale of 1 to 5, I was going to say leaked government documents, but you gave me a new idea. So, 1 to 5 Oscar cakes. 'Cause I've never heard of that phrase before. It's got all the ingredients for an Oscar cake.
Cakes.
If we have any Oscar parties this year, I expect you to make an Oscar cake.
I will make Oscar cake, I promise.
So, 1 of 5 Oscar cakes. What would you give it?
I'd have to give it a 3.75 Oscar cakes. Just because, like I said, the message is poignant. It was wonderful on historical accuracy. It was great acting, well done film. Just, I was bored, but also distracted. So I shouldn't take it against the film, because it was probably great, but I was distracted.
All right, so 3 3/4. All right, getting to the quarters in that case. All right, so my final thoughts with it. It was well done. Is it Oscar worthy? Does it have all the ingredients for the Oscar cake? I don't know. I think that anytime you put Tom Hanks, Meryl Streep, and Steven Spielberg together, you're at least going to get a little bit of buzz, especially telling a historical drama. The Oscars love those kind of stories. They usually do fairly well, and if they don't do well, they at least get a lot of nomination buzz. I think it's going to get a lot of nominations. It had 6 Golden Globe nominations. It didn't win anything. John Williams also is attached to this. He did the music for it. I don't remember there being any music, but that also speaks well to Williams, is because with the music the scores that he introduces into films, it doesn't detract from the film. So that might speak well for him. But I'm going to give it a 3.5 out of 5, 3.5 Oscar cakes. It was a good story. It was a good story that was told well. Streep and Hanks can only take a movie so far, though. While I did like the ensemble, I had mentioned earlier, the ensemble for me was probably a lot better than I expected. It just was trying to do too much. Mm-hmm. It tried to tell too many different stories, and I think because of that, it forgot some of the, some of it had to be sacrificed. While we're talking about that ensemble, I was looking at some of them. A lot of Broadway stars. Judith, she actually portrayed Carole King in Beautiful. Also Stark Sands, who originally was Charlie in Kinky Boots, the original. They were all in this, and I'm just like looking through the cast list, and I'm like, okay, so you have a lot of people from a lot of different areas and venues of life. Broadway, traditional Oscar-worthy actors, and then you've got guys like David Cross, who you would never expect in a Spielberg drama. That was cool. It was cool to see that all come together. Yeah. The message was there, but I think ultimately Spielberg took on too much. He, like we said, it tried to take on women's rights. He tried to take on the message of the free press. And in the climate that we live in today, you have to do justice to both of those. You can't sacrifice anything in either. And I don't feel like he threw away either women's rights or free press or any parts of them. Mm-hmm. I just think that if you're saying, hey, we're going to talk about women's rights or we're going to talk about, free press, you've got to have a lot more than 2 hours to do it.
Exactly. It felt almost like he was pandering to the times currently, and women's rights is the big push.
Yeah.
Not that freedom of the press isn't important, but women's right is what, for lack of a better term, hot right now.
Oh yeah.
And so some of those things felt like an afterthought. It wasn't a Meryl Streep movie. I mean, she was not in most of it.
It didn't feel... She had her,
felt
like you
a
said...
Tom Hanks movie.
She had her moment when she was on the phone, and she had her moment in that scene with her daughter, Alison Brie.
Yep.
Those were her moments, but it didn't feel like she was a lead. And I would even say it didn't even feel like Hanks was a lead at times.
True.
It felt like an ensemble story, but if you see the poster, it doesn't seem like an ensemble story. It seems like the movie's called Streep Hanks.
Yeah.
It's you even made that joke.
Yeah, because on the poster, Streep and Hanks are much bigger than the actual The Post, which is hilarious.
And I think that's a lot of the draw, and they both did very well. And I think that both of them should receive some Oscar nominations. I think that you'll get, and I don't know the classification. Streep it'll probably be lead. Hanks will probably be lead. I don't think his would fall into supporting. So I think both of them will get it. Spielberg will get a nod. It'll get a nod for Best Picture. It's coming out at the right time. It tells the right story. Mm-hmm. I'd be shocked if it won. Honestly, in comparison to some of the other ones I've seen and still need to see for that matter. I don't think it'll win. It was good, but the Oscars are just as political as the politics themselves, and everybody in there has had their moment, and they haven't paid enough dues to come around again. We always hear about that story coming around, but it is Streep, so you never know. She can win 100 more Oscars before she passes eventually, which I don't think will ever happen because she is an acting goddess.
It's got all the ingredients for an Oscar cake.
Oscar cake coming soon to a theater near you. All right, so next week we are going to be looking at a to-be-announced film. I was looking ahead, and there's just so much coming out right now, and so much that needs to be seen before the Oscars roll around in March. So not quite sure yet. There are a few films that still need to be seen. I still need to go see Dunkirk, and I want to see The Shape of Water. And in 3 Billboards Outside Ebbing, Missouri. There's plenty that needs to be seen. So it may not be a new release next week, but check out our Twitter to find out if we do know what's going on before next Thursday. You can always reach us through that Twitter at DriveInEventide, or you can email us at driveineventide@gmail.com. Jordan, thanks for coming on again. I know that you were distracted, but it was good to have you on again as we dealt through cats and dealing with dinner cooking and all this other stuff. So if you guys hear some side noises, you get some bonus points if you can identify what they are.
Belle, do you want to say hi? Belle. Belle wants to play with her toys that we currently have on the table.
We took her toys away from her. You probably hear some squeaks. But you know what? We're going to wrap this thing up. So Jordan, again, thanks for coming, and thanks for joining me on episode 13. We're getting close to that number 15.
Thank you.
All right, guys. Everybody drive home safely. We will see you next week.